Welcome back, everybody. I'm Kathy Resnicek.
And I'm Richard Pressler.
And we're here today to talk about Assignment 4 in Module 3 in the Tapped Wired Networking program. So we looked at Layer 2, both the resiliency and the QoS mechanism. And then last assignment we did Layer 3, the resiliency. And so this, in Assignment 4, we're going to look at Layer 3 QoS mechanism. So tell us all about it.
All right. Well, you may have, we've already talked about why QoS is important,
Right.
so I'm not going to rehash that. But you may have noticed that within the Layer 2 standard, within 802.1p and that priority byte, it's fairly limited. You really only have 8 values you could possibly assign. So that's 8 different types of traffic on your network. Well, your network probably has a lot more than 8 different types of traffic. You might have 20 or 30 different types of traffic. So at Layer 3 with DiffServe, we have the option to go up to 64 different types of traffic. We could classify traffic 64 different ways using the priority bit or byte. So that makes it very convenient for us to basically say that we're going to have much more granularity with our quality of service policy maps and class maps, which is very useful. Now, beyond that, also your point in the network where you're most likely to need quality of service is not really Layer 2.
Right.
Layer 2, you'll need some quality of service for things like VoIP handsets, and we talked about that a lot. But really the major point in your network where you're going to need quality of service is when you're going from a bigger pipe to a smaller pipe, and so you're really going to experience congestion. You're most likely going to have congestion. And that's in a K-12 setting, that would be a school that's attaching to a service provider, and the service provider isn't going to give them a 1 or 10 gig connection necessarily because that's so expensive. So maybe they only can afford a 10 megabit connection, right? But their internal network is all 1 or 10 gig. Well, what do you do when you go to that 10 megabit connection? It's usually going to be a Layer 3 interface on that 10 meg connection, and that's the point where you really want to make good decisions about what traffic is the most important and prioritize it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Same thing when you attach to your internet service provider. That's a good point to decide what internet traffic is the most important to the school district. And you'll often put those rules either on a router or a firewall that's connected to that internet service provider. So that's one of the main differences, is that there's a lot more options, there's a lot more flexibility. Some of these things are going to feel very familiar because the reason to do quality of service is the same. It's really the same. You're prioritizing traffic no matter how you do it. But at Layer 3, you get all of these additional options, and you're also going to see a little bit of the history of quality of service in Layer 3. It started out with just being able to classify traffic. Actually, it ended up just being able to classify 8 types of traffic, again, even at Layer 3. But with DiffServe, which we're going to focus on, you have a lot more options and flexibility available to you.
Great. And that sounds like it's going to kind of wrap up, do a really good job of pulling everything we talked about or looked at in Module 3 together.
Yeah, I hope so. It should wrap up all of the quality of service concepts, at least at a high level. Keep in mind that there are courses for quality of service that last 4 or 5 days for a single course, only focused on things like DiffServe. So it is possible to go even deeper, and you'll probably see in some of the video content that it starts to hint that there's a lot more that you can dig into with this. But there's a certain level of knowledge necessary to just know how to implement it and know what it should be doing for you that can really help improve the network performance.
And I would imagine on all networks it's really important, but in K-12 where we have certain critical services and probably maybe not a full suite of network engineers making sure that everything's that's probably a really important thing for anyone working in a K-12 network setting for them to understand.
Yeah, and here's another example is if you know that the applications from a business perspective, you know which ones are more important, and you're the network administrator for a K-12 school district, and then you hire a contractor to implement some equipment for you, well, now you can communicate using the same language as the contractor. You can communicate what you want them to program that equipment to do. So you could tell the contractor that you want it to classify all VoIP traffic, and you want it to mark that traffic, and you want it to prioritize that traffic above all other traffic in the network. And then you can also say, in addition to that, The next criteria would be all testing traffic. So right under VoIP is testing. And then after testing is video. And then after video is whatever, some business application.
Right.
But the contractor may not know those business requirements.
Right.
But an administrator who works for the school district would. And this way they can communicate those requirements into the actual technical implementation, even if they don't do it themselves, but they can at least communicate and say, here's what I want. The other place it's very valuable is when you're trying to pick a piece of equipment.
Okay.
That's a challenge. Sometimes you are faced with just so many different choices in this industry. I mean, it's every manufacturer will say that their equipment's the best, of course.
Does everything.
And within each manufacturer, they're going to have different price points for different types of equipment.
Right.
And sometimes it's easy to summarize it and say, well, it's just speed, right? So
Right.
a 40 gig router costs me more than a 10 gig router.
Right.
That's true, but it's not just speed. It's the buffer space. It's the CPU. It's other things about that piece of equipment that allow it to perform at a higher rate. And you can definitely, by knowing how quality of service mechanisms work, it will definitely drive the equipment choices that you're going to make at different parts of the network, because you're going to want those deep buffers for certain parts of the network where congestion could occur.
Great. So just like having network and things on the network communicate well, understanding this will help you communicate well with anybody that you need to work with.
Especially network engineers who understand these things. Yeah, it really helps to know what's possible.
Awesome.
Very good.